Okay, I'm gonna try again. I think I unmuted my microphone this time. Okay, I'm reading one of my favorite books when I'm down and thinking the world is hopeless. This book gives me a lot of hope. It's called La Peste, or The Plague by Albert Camus. I've been reading it not every night, but I've been reading a few chapters a night for a few weeks now, and we're wrapping up part two, halfway through chapter 9. When Rom Bear stepped out of the cathedral, he saw Gonzalez already going down the steps on his way back to the town. "I thought you'd cleared off, old boy," he said to the journalist, "considering how late it is." He proceeded to explain that he'd gone to meet his friends at the place agreed on, which was quite nearby, at 10 to 8, the time they'd fixed, and waited 20 minutes without seeing them. Something must have held them up. There's lots of snags, you know, in our line of business. He suggested another meeting at the same time on the following day beside the war memorial. Rom Bear sighed and pushed his hat back on his head. "Don't take it so hard," Gonzalez laughed. "Why, think of all the swerves and runs and passes you got to make to score a goal." "Quite so," Rom Bear agreed, "but the game lasts only an hour and a half." The war memorial at ROM stands at the one place where one has a glimpse of the sea, a sort of esplanade following for a short distance the brow of the cliff overlooking the harbor. Next day, being again the first to arrive at the meeting place, Rom Bear whiled away the time reading the list of names of those who had died for their country. Some minutes later, two men strolled up, gave him a casual glance, then resting their elbows on the parapet of the esplanade, gazed down intently at the empty, lifeless harbor. Both wore short-sleeved jerseys and blue trousers, and were of much the same height. The journalist moved away, and seated on a stone bench, studied their appearance at leisure. They were obviously youngsters, not more than 20. Just then he saw Gonzalez coming up. "Those are our friends," he said, and apologizing for being late, he then led Rom Bear to the two youths, whom he introduced as Marcel and Louie. They looked so much alike that Rom Bear had no doubt they were brothers. "Right," said Gonzalez. "Now you know each other, you can get down to business." Marcel, or Louis, said that their turn of sentry duty began in 2 days' time and lasted a week. They'd have to watch out for the night when there was the best chance of bringing it off. The trouble was that there were two other sentries, regular soldiers besides themselves, at the west gate. These two men had better be kept out of the business. One couldn't depend on them, and anyhow it would pile up expenses unnecessarily. Some evenings, however, these two sentries spent several hours in the back room of a nearby bar. Marcel, or Louis, said that the best thing he could do would be to stay at their place, which was only a few minutes' walk from the gate, and wait till one of them came to tell him the coast was clear. It should then be quite easy for him to make his getaway. But there was no time to lose. There had been talk about setting up duplicate sentry posts a little farther out. Rom Bear agreed and handed some of his few remaining cigarettes to the young man. The one who had not yet spoken asked Gonzalez if the question of expenses had been settled and whether an advance would be given. "No," Gonzalez said, "and you needn't bother about that. He's a pal of mine. He'll pay when he leaves." Another meeting was arranged. Gonzalez suggested their dining together on the next day but one, at the Spanish restaurant. It was at easy walking distance from where the young men lived. "For the first night," he added, "I'll keep you company, old boy." Next day, on his way to his bedroom, Rom Bear met Turia coming down the stairs at the hotel. "Like to come with me?" he asked. "I'm just off to see Ria." Rom Bear hesitated. "Well, I never feel sure I'm not disturbing him." "I don't think you need to worry about that. He's talked about you quite a lot." The journalist pondered. Then, "Look here," he said, "if you've any time to spare after dinner, never mind how late, why not come to the hotel, both of you, and have a drink with me?" "That will depend on Ria." Turia sounded doubtful, and on the plague. At 11 o'clock that night, however, Ria and Turia entered the small, narrow bar of the hotel. Some 30 people were crowded into it, all talking at the top of their voices. Coming from the silence of the plague-bound town, the two newcomers were startled by the sudden burst of noise, and halted in the doorway. They understood the reason for it when they saw that spirits were still to be had here. Rom Bear, who was perched on a stool at the corner of the bar, beckoned to them. With complete coolness he elbowed away a noisy customer beside him to make room for his friends. "You've no objection to a spot of something strong?" No, Turia replied, quite the contrary. Ria sniffed the pungency of bitter herbs in the drink that Rom Bear handed him. It was hard to make oneself heard in the din of voices, but Rom Bear seemed chiefly concerned with drinking. The doctor couldn't make up his mind whether he was drunk yet. At one of the two tables, which occupied all the remaining space beyond the half circle round the bar, a naval officer, with a girl on each side of him, was describing to a fat, red-faced man a typhus epidemic at Cairo. They had camps, you know, he was saying, for the natives, with tents for the sick ones and a ring of sentries all around. If a member of the family came along and tried to smuggle in one of those damn fool native remedies, they fired at sight. A bit tough, I grant you, but it was the only thing to do. At the other table, round which sat a bevy of bright young people, the talk was incomprehensible, half drowned by the stridence of St. James Infirmary coming from a loudspeaker just above their heads. Any luck? Ria had to raise his voice. I'm getting on, Rom Bear replied. In the course of a week, perhaps. A pity, Turia shouted. Why? Oh, Ria put in. Turia said that because he thinks she might be useful to us here. But personally, I understand your wish to get away only too well. Turia stood the next round of drinks. Rom Bear got off his stool and looked him in the eyes for the first time. How could I be useful? Why, of course, Turia replied slowly, reaching towards his glass, in one of our sanitary squads. The look of brooding obstinacy that Rom Bear so often had came back to his face, and he climbed again onto his stool. Don't you think these squads of ours do any good? Turia had just taken a sip of his glass and was gazing hard at Rom Bear. I'm sure they do, the journalist replied and drank off his glass. Ria noticed that his hand was shaking, and he decided definitely that the man was far gone in drink. Next day, when for the second time Rom Bear entered the Spanish restaurant, he had to make his way through a group of men who had taken chairs out on the pavement and were sitting in the green gold evening light, enjoying the first breaths of cooler air. They were smoking an acrid-smelling tobacco. The restaurant itself was almost empty. Rom Bear went to the table at the back at which Gonzales had sat when they met for the first time. He told the waitress he would wait a bit. It was 7:30. In twos and threes, the men from outside began to dribble in and seated themselves at the tables. The waitresses started serving, and a tinkle of knives and forks, a hum of conversation began to fill the cellar-like room. At 8, Rom Bear was still waiting. The lights were turned on. A new set of people took the other chairs at his table. He ordered dinner. At 8:30, he had finished without having seen either Gonzales or the two young men. The restaurant was gradually emptying, and outside night was falling rapidly. The curtains hung across the doorway were billowing in a warm breeze from the sea. At 9, Rom Bear realized that the restaurant was quite empty and the waitress eyeing him curiously. He paid, went out, and noticing that a cafe across the road was open, settled down there at a place from which he could keep an eye on the entrance of the restaurant. At 9:30, he walked slowly back to his hotel, racking his brains for some method of tracking down Gonzales, whose address he did not know, and bitterly discouraged by the not unlikely prospect of having to start the tiresome business all over again. It was at this moment, as he walked in the dark streets along which ambulances were speeding, that it suddenly struck him, as he informed Dr. Ria subsequently, that all this time he'd practically forgotten the woman he loved. So absorbed had he been in trying to find a rift in the walls that cut him off from her. But at this moment, this same moment, now that once more all ways of escape were sealed against him, he felt his longing for her blaze up again with a violence so sudden, so intense, that he started running to his hotel, as if to escape the burning pain that nonetheless pervaded him, racing like wildfire in his blood. Very early next day, however, he called on Ria to ask him where he could find Cotard. The only thing to do is pick up the thread again where I dropped it. Come tomorrow night, Ria said. Turia asked me to invite Cotard here. I don't know why. He's due to come at 10. Come at 10:30. When Cotard visited the doctor next day, Turia and Ria were discussing the case of one of Ria's patients who, against all expectation, had recovered. It was 10 to 1 against, Taru commented. He was in luck. Oh, come now, Kotal said. It can't have been plague, that's all. They assured him there was no doubt it was a case of plague. That's impossible, since he recovered. You know as well as I do, once you have plague, your number's up. True enough as a general rule, Ria replied, but if you refuse to be beaten, you have some pleasant surprises. Kotal laughed. Precious few, anyhow. You saw the number of deaths this evening. Taru, who was gazing amiably at Kotal, said he knew the latest figures and that the position was extremely serious. But what did that prove? Only that still more stringent measures should be applied. How? You can't make more stringent ones than those we have now? No, but every person in the town must apply them to himself. Kotal stared at him in a puzzled manner, and Taru went on to say that there were far too many slackers, that this plague was everybody's business and everyone should do his duty. For instance, any able-bodied man was welcome in the sanitary squads. That's an idea, Kotal smiled, but it won't get you anywhere. The plague has had the whip hand of you, and there's nothing to be done about it. We shall know whether that is so. Taru's voice was carefully controlled, only when we've tried everything. Meanwhile, Ria had been sitting at his desk copying out reports. Taru was still gazing at the little businessman who was sitting uneasily in his chair. Look here, Monsieur Kotal, why don't you join us? Picking up his bowler hat, Kotal rose from his chair with an offended expression. It's not my job, he said. Then, with an air of bravado, added, what's more, the plague suits me quite well, and I see no reason why I should bother about trying to stop it. As if a new idea had just waylaid him, Taru struck his forehead. Why, of course. I was forgetting. If it wasn't for your good friend the plague, you'd be arrested. Kotal gave a start and gripped the back of the chair as if he were about to fall. Ria had stopped writing and was observing him with grave interest. Who told you that? Kotal almost screamed. Why, you yourself, Taru looked surprised. At least that's what the doctrine I've gathered from the way you speak. Losing all control of himself, Kotal let out a volley of oaths. Don't get excited, Taru said quietly. Neither I nor the doctor would dream of reporting you to the police. What you may have done is no business of ours. And anyhow, we've never had much use for the police. Come now, sit down again. Kotal looked at the chair, then hesitantly lowered himself into it. He heaved a deep sigh. It's something that happened ages ago, he began. Somehow they've dug it up. I thought it had all been forgotten. But somebody started talking, blast him. They sent for me and told me not to budge till the inquiry was finished, and I felt pretty sure they'd end up by arresting me. Was it anything serious, Taru asked? That depends on what you mean by serious. It wasn't murder, anyhow. Imprisonment or penal servitude? Kotal was looking almost abject. Well, imprisonment, if I'm lucky. But after a moment, he grew excited again. It was all a mistake. Everybody makes mistakes, don't they? And I can't bear the idea of being pulled in for that, of being torn from my home and habits and everyone I know. And is that the reason, Taru asked, why you had the bright idea of hanging yourself? Yes, it was a damn fool thing to do, I admit. For the first time, Ria spoke. He told Kotal that he quite understood his anxiety, but perhaps everything would come out right in the end. Oh, for the moment, I have nothing to fear. I can see, Taru said, that you're not going to join in our effort. Twiddling his hat uneasily, Kotal gazed at Taru with shifty eyes. I hope you won't bear me a grudge, Monsieur Taru. Certainly not. But, Taru smiled, do try at least not to propagate the microbe deliberately. Kotal protested that he'd never wanted the plague. It was pure chance that had broken out, and he wasn't to blame if it happened to make things easier for him just now. Then he seemed to pluck up courage again, and when Rom Bear entered was shouting almost aggressively, What's more, I'm pretty sure you won't get anywhere. Rom Bear learnt to his chagrin that Kotal didn't know where Gonzalez lived. He suggested that they'd better pay another visit to the small cafe. They made an appointment for the following day. When Ria gave him to understand that he'd like to be kept posted as to his success or otherwise, Rom Bear proposed that he and Taru should look him up one night at the end of the week. They could come as late as they liked and would be sure to find him in his room. Next morning, Cotar and Rom Bear went to the cafe and left a message for Garcia asking him to come that evening or if this could not be managed next day. They waited for him in vain that evening. Next day, Garcia turned up. He listened in silence to what Rom Bear had to say, then informed him that he had no idea what had happened, but knew that several districts of the town had been isolated for 24 hours for a house-to-house inspection. Quite possibly Gonzalez and the two youngsters hadn't been able to get through the cordon. All he could do was to put them in touch once more with Raoul. Naturally, this couldn't be done before the next day, but one. I see, Rom Bear said. I'll have to start it all over again, from scratch. On the next day but one, Raoul, whom Rom Bear had met at a street corner, confirmed Garcia's surmise. The low-lying districts had in fact been isolated and a cordon put round them. The next thing was to get in contact with Gonzalez. 2 days later, Rom Bear was lunching with the footballer. It's too damn silly, Gonzalez said. Of course you should have arranged some way of seeing each other. Rom Bear heartily agreed. Tomorrow morning, Gonzalez continued, we'll look up the kids and try to get a real move on. When they called the next day, however, the youngsters were out. A note was left fixing a meeting for the following day at noon outside the high school. When Rom Bear came back to his hotel, Taru was struck by the look on his face. Not feeling well? He asked. It's having to start it all again that's got me down. Then he added, you'll come tonight, won't you? When the two friends entered Rom Bear's room that night, they found him lying on the bed. He got up at once and filled the glasses he had ready, but before lifting his to his lips, Ria asked him if he was making progress. The journalist replied that he'd started the same round again and got to the same point as before. In a day or two, he was to have his last appointment. Then he took a sip of his drink and added gloomily, needless to say, they won't turn up. Oh, come, that doesn't follow because they let you down last time. So you haven't understood yet? Rom Bear shrugged his shoulders almost scornfully. Understood what? The plague. Ah, Ria exclaimed. No, you haven't understood that it means exactly that same thing over and over and over again. He went to a corner of the room and started a small gramophone. What's that record? Taru asked. I've heard it before. It's St. James Infirmary. While the gramophone was playing, 2 shots rang out in the distance. A dog or a getaway, Taru remarked. When, some moments later, the record ended, an ambulance bell could be heard clanging past under the window and receding into silence. Rather a boring record, Rom Bear remarked, and this must be the 10th time I've put it on today. Are you really so fond of it? No, but it's the only one I have. And after a moment he added, that's what I said it was. The same thing over and over again. He asked Ria how the sanitary groups were functioning. 5 teams were now at work, and it was hoped to form others. Sitting on the bed, the journalist seemed to be studying his fingernails. Ria was gazing at his squat, powerfully built form, hunched up on the edge of the bed. Suddenly, he realized that Rom Bear was returning his gaze. You know, Doctor, I've given a lot of thought to your campaign. And if I'm not with you, I have my reasons. No, I don't think it's that I'm afraid to risk my skin again. I took part in the Spanish Civil War. On which side? Taru asked. The losing side. But since then I've done a bit of thinking. About what? Courage. I know now that man is capable of great deeds. But if he isn't capable of a great emotion, well, he leaves me cold. One had the idea that he's capable of everything, Taru remarked. I can't agree. If he's incapable of he's incapable of suffering for a long time, or being happy for a long time, which means that he's incapable of anything really worthwhile. He looked at the 2 men in turn, then asked, tell me, Taru, are you capable of dying for love? I couldn't say, but I hardly think so, as I am now. You see? But you're capable of dying for an idea. One can see that right away. Well, personally, I've seen enough of people who die for an idea. I don't believe in heroism. I know it's easy, and I've learned it can be murderous. What interests me is living and dying for what one loves. Ria had been watching the journalist attentively. With his eyes still on him, he said quietly, "Man isn't an idea, Rom Bear." Rom Bear sprang off the bed, his face ablaze with passion. Man is an idea, and a precious small idea once he turns his back on love. And that's my point. We, mankind, have lost the capacity for love. We must face that fact, Doctor. Let's wait to acquire that capacity, or if it's really beyond us, wait for the deliverance that will come to each of us anyway, without us playing the hero. Personally, I look no farther. Ria rose. He suddenly appeared very tired. You're right, Rom Bear. Quite right. And for nothing in the world would I try to dissuade you from what you're going to do. It seems to me absolutely right and proper. However, there's one thing I must tell you. There's no question of heroism in all this. It's a matter of common decency. That's an idea which may make some people smile, but that's the only means of fighting a plague. Common decency. What do you mean by common decency? Rom Bear's tone was grave. I don't know what it means for other people, but in my case, I know that it consists in doing my job. Your job? I only wish I were sure what my job is. There was a mordant edge to Rom Bear's voice. Maybe I'm all wrong in putting love first. Ria looked him in the eyes. No, he said vehemently. You are not wrong. Rom Bear gazed thoughtfully at them. You too, he said. I suppose you've nothing to lose in all this. It's easier that way to be on the side of the angels. Ria drained his glass. Come along, he said to Toru. We've work to do. He went out. Toru followed, but seemed to change his mind when he reached the door. He stopped and looked at the journalist. I suppose you don't know that Ria's wife is in a sanatorium, 100 miles or so away. Rom Bear showed surprise and began to say something, but Toru had already left the room. At a very early hour next day, Rom Bear rang up the doctor. Would you agree to my working with you until I find some way of getting out of the town? There was a moment's silence before the reply came. Certainly, Rom Bear. Thanks.